close all the way. We look where the first bypass hole is, right where that throttle plate's going to close. You can kind of press with your finger a little bit and then open it and just tap it shut a little bit. And you'll notice that the screw holes are now lined up and we're not showing any of the first bypass hole. We're beginning to get there, but we're just at the very preliminary stages of actually setting this plate. The screws that we use, you took staked screws out. Those can't be reused. The screws that we use are a JIS screw and they have a locking washer on them. That means that we can relax the screw and retighten it as many times as we want, and neither heat nor vibration nor exposure to solvents, gasoline flowing over them, nothing is ever going to make this screw work its way loose. Set the screw and run it down until it's just beginning to put some pressure on the locking washer. We just want to kind of snug it up. Second screw goes into place. Run it down until you begin to feel some friction. Now, use your thumb, reach up and engage the spring over the post where it goes. Again, we want to make sure that the spring is in line. If you need to take the spring off to make sure that it's reset, that's fine. Do it as many times as you need to make sure that the spring, the coils of the spring, are lying evenly next to each other. Rotate it up. Now the coils of my spring are lying perfectly with each other. Now the spring is beginning to go to work. At this point, this is when we can add a little more tension to the nut, because the nut being this far out is actually going to introduce a little bit of binding because the alignment's wrong out here. So we tighten the nut down a little bit to where it begins to compress the locking washer. Now the throttle is beginning to move properly. This is where we can get into trouble. If that throttle plate does not close to where it covers that first bypass hole, not by snapping it shut, but by just lowering it shut, we're out of alignment. I can see that now. And it's a very simple matter to fix, and this is where the true intricacy comes in to this part of the process. The first thing we want to look at now is where the shims are. If we see any light, if we see any gap between the end of the throttle shaft and the first shim, that's the first sign that we're going to be in trouble. So now we can loosen the screws. And we just gently push here, just to make sure. Once we know that the throttle plate is loose and we can move it, press gently here, and now we can pull up on the throttle plate ever so gently. What I'll do at this point is I'll hold my finger against it, give it some pressure up on the top, rotate the throttle open a little bit, and then hold it closed with my finger. You see what I'm doing? I'm holding it closed and I'm pushing it without snapping it shut. I want to hold the plate in position apply a little bit of pressure, a little bit more torque to the screws. I've just eliminated the binding that was there. This is the important part. As you rotate the throttle open, it has to close completely by just lowering it shut. Slamming, this doesn't happen in real life with these carburetors. The fastest the throttle's going to go down is about like that. And if this thing is resisting even a little bit as it gets to the very last part, it won't synchronize, depending on how bad it is. The carburetors are a little bit forgiving. If there's a tiny bit of resistance, that's fine. But if when you lower it closed, if you can see even a tiny fraction of that first bypass hole, and if you can push the throttle and cause it to cover it, you have binding, and we need to keep working this until we can drop this thing closed slowly and gradually, and it'll close completely all the way every single time. Once you have this done, now we can finish setting the torque on the screw. A screw with a locking washer. People ask about torque values. There really isn't a torque value for a screw with a locking washer. It is achieved the proper torque when the locking washer is completely compressed. Because at that point, the locking washer is biting into the screw head and it's biting into the base metal so that nothing is ever going to take it out. People are tempted to get them to the point where they're completely tight according to the engineering specifications for a locking washer. It'll come to a point where you'll know when it's tight, and they'll give it an extra eighth of a turn, and then the next time somebody comes along and tries to remove that fastener, or if heaven forbid you have to relax it because you've reintroduced binding from over torquing, you're going to wreck that screw trying to take it out, no matter how good it is, no matter how good your driver tip is, and no matter how good that screw is, because you've over torqued it and you're going to wreck it no matter what you do. We tighten our fasteners. Now, the very last step is we bring that down to full torque. Again, I know that it's fully torqued as soon as that locking washer flattens out completely, and this throttle has now been fully serviced. It's ready to go back together with all of its partners. And if you feel any resistance at any point during this process, if it begins to hang at any point, you gotta stop and start over again. You gotta back up until this closes absolutely flawlessly. This is what's going to give you a good job, and it's going to give you a predictable job at the end. If something does go wrong later, if your synchronization is off, it'll be because the carburetors need to be synchronized. It won't be because you've introduced binding in the throttle shafts.